On Wednesday morning, the prosecution called up the Oxford School Dean of Students to testify. His name was Mr. Ejact. He's been mentioned previously in the trial. My first impression after listening to his testimony was that he wasn't that involved in the whole situation, which really makes me wonder why the counselor who testified yesterday was leaning towards the fact that Ejac was the one who could make the call as to whether Ethan stayed in school or went home. And I don't know, it's almost like I almost feel, and this is just my feeling, that the school counselor is pointing the finger at the dean and the dean's pointing the finger at the school counselor. But to be honest with you guys, my first impression of this guy, this dean of students, is just not that great. We're going to listen to the majority of his conversation about what happened at the school that day when the math teacher showed the drawings that Ethan had done of the weapon and some pictures that were disturbing. And then we'll come back.
Okay. And go ahead, and this was already admitted, go ahead and read us the email that you received.
Good morning. I had a student during first hour today, Ethan Crumbley, who was on his phone looking at different bullets at the end of first hour today as I was walking around the room passing out their essays. I didn't get a chance to investigate it a bit further since it was the end of the hour. Now that he's on my radar, I'm also noticing that some of his previous work that he's completed from earlier in the year leans a bit toward the violent side. I could bring down these things later today during my fifth hour prep if you would like them.
Okay. And this email was sent at 9:32 a.m. to both you and Ms. Fine. When did you actually receive the email? When did you actually read it?
When I received the email, it was probably around 11 a.m.
Okay.
I was aware that there was an email.
And tell us what happened with this situation.
So when I was made aware of the email, it was coming from Ms. Fine, who had overheard me returning to my office from a meeting that I was in when this email was initially sent. The meeting had since ended, and so she was just walking me through what they did.
Okay, so she updated you on what happened in the meeting?
I'm sorry, what?
She gave you an update on what happened in the meeting?
Yes,
with
correct.
Jennifer Crumbley's son? Okay. After you received that information, did you determine if you had to take any steps regarding discipline?
It wasn't necessary that I did anything further. She did everything that I would have done.
All right. Did you have any additional interaction with that student at all on Monday the 29th?
No.
Okay. Now, moving towards, did you receive any emails later on in the evening, Monday the 29th, regarding the student? Anything at all with him?
I don't remember if I did or not.
Okay. November the 30th, Tuesday. This has already been admitted on your screen here as People's 160. This is an email from Miss Morgan. And who is she and what does she do?
Miss Morgan is a math teacher at Oxford High School.
Okay. So she sent this email to you as well as Mr. Hopkins Tuesday, November 30th at 9:32 a.m.?
Correct.
Okay. Up until this point in time, did you have any conversations regarding Jennifer Crumbley's son?
Prior to this email?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, tell us about that, please.
So I was in my office Tuesday morning when Miss Morgan had walked down to the front office just looking to share some information about a student that had drawn inappropriate things on a piece of paper. And I was the only person available to respond to that or to hear her out.
So let me ask you this. This is People 74. It's already been admitted. You said a piece of paper. Is this what you're referring to?
That is correct.
Okay. So prior to the email at 9:32 a.m., Miss Morgan showed you this, which has been admitted as People 74?
She showed me an image of that on her cell phone. Yes.
On her cell phone, okay.
Yes.
Do you recall about what time that happened?
I don't know.
Okay.
I just know that it was during our second period of the day. However, I don't remember what time.
Okay, that's fair. Tell us about that conversation when she came and showed you this picture.
She had said she just needed to share that a student had written some inappropriate things on an assignment. And so I told her, I kind of waved her into my office since everybody else was occupied. And she had turned her phone around and showed it to me. And I had noticed the name on the top that I recognized from the day before.
Okay.
Ms. Fine had shared that information with me.
Mm-hmm.
And my response to that was, I need to go get his counselor. And her response was, I need to get back to class.
Okay. So that was Now, what was your initial response in seeing this, Exhibit 74?
That I needed to alert his counselor.
And why is that?
Because it seemed like he might need somebody to talk to, or we might need to figure out how we could get him some additional help.
Okay. Now, when you first looked at this drawing, what's the first thing that jumped out at you?
The statements.
Which one in
Blood,
particular?
blood everywhere is what I noticed first. The world is dead. My life is useless. Those were the things that stood out to me.
Okay. So when you were shown this, were you thinking of a lens through discipline or through his counselor?
Counseling, 100%.
Why do you say 100%?
Because I don't notice anything on there that would rise to the level that there would be any type of student discipline.
Okay. So what happened next, please?
So she left Miss Morgan left my office, and I left my office. As she returned to her classroom, and I walked down to the counseling area to alert Mr. Hopkins.
Okay. And did you show this drawing to Mr. Hopkins?
I did not.
Okay. When you say you alerted him, what do you mean?
So when I arrived to the threshold of the doorway in his office, before I even said a word, he said to me, "Ethan Crumbley," and my response was, "Yeah, how did you know?" And so he had shared that he had received an email that morning from another teacher regarding Ethan Crumbley, and his understanding was that's why I was there, and that's when I had shared with him that I had received a drawing from Miss Morgan with those statements on it.
Okay, this drawing right here, Exhibit 74?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Now tell us what happened next, please.
His response, Mr. Hopkins' response to that was, "I'll go get him from class right now." And he stood up from his chair and walked down to the math class and grabbed Ethan.
Okay, did you go with him or did you stay?
I remained in his office.
Okay. Mr. Hopkins retrieved the defendant's son from class, brought him back to his office where you were waiting?
Correct.
Okay. And then was a conversation ensued between Mr. Hopkins and the defendant's son?
Yes.
Okay. Now, he testified yesterday, so without telling us what words were actually said by each other, tell us what you did and why.
I just sat there to listen for one, to be an additional adult for support. I feel it's important in my job to know that there's more than one adult in the building that cares about the students. And so it was important to me that I was there for support, but also there in case there was a reason that there was behavior that rose to the level for discipline.
Okay. And during that initial conversation, did your opinion ever change to look at this as a counseling lens or a discipline lens?
No, it did not change.
Was a decision made to call that student's parents?
Yes.
Okay. And who made the decision?
Sean had made that decision.
Okay. And were you there when he made that phone call?
I was, yes.
All right. And we have evidence to suggest it was at 9:24 and 9:27 a.m. when phone calls were made. Does that sound right to you?
Yes.
Were you in the office when the calls were made?
I was, yes.
Okay. Were you in the office when a portion of the phone call was on speakerphone?
I was, yes.
Tell us what you recall from that conversation.
So I recall Mr. Hopkins putting the phone on speaker so that the conversation could be had collectively. And so Sean Hopkins had introduced myself and said we were there with Ethan. And during that conversation, he had forwarded the email that we got of this assignment to his mother.
Is that the defendant, Jennifer Crumbley?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
So that she could see it in real time while we were having the conversation.
Okay. Did the defendant make any statements regarding that?
I believe she said, "What were you thinking? Why did you do this?"
Okay. And that was while on the speakerphone where her son would be able to hear it?
Yes.
Okay. Were you there when, at some point the defendant and her husband arrived at the school?
Correct.
Okay. So in the time period that elapsed from that phone call to the time period when the defendant and her husband arrived at the school, what did you do?
So once the conversation had ended, we had already changed class periods, and it was now our third hour of the day. And so his backpack was still remaining in the math class. And so it's a common protocol that our security or a hall monitor or someone will go retrieve the students' belongings if they're still waiting on a parent meeting or still having a conversation. That way it's not left when other students arrive.
Okay, so what did you do?
So I left Mr. Hopkins' office and walked down to Miss Morgan's classroom to retrieve his backpack.
Okay, and did you give it to him?
Yes, I did.
Okay. At that point in time, with the COVID protocols in place for students using lockers?
Not at all.
Okay. So every student had a backpack with them at all times?
Every student had a backpack.
Okay. Now, what was your expectation of what was to occur at the meeting with James and Jennifer Crumbley at the school?
So my understanding was that we were going to discuss what would be best to move forward next for getting him some additional help, and that would be happening that afternoon.
Okay. As in happening that afternoon, what does that mean?
That he would be leaving from the parent meeting with his parents.
Okay. Were you in the counseling office during the meeting with James and Jennifer Crumbley?
For most of it, yes.
Okay. And who led the meeting primarily?
Mr. Hopkins did.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about how that meeting progressed.
So when I arrived, Mr. and Mrs. Crumbley were already in his office, and they had already began talking about the events that led to the parent meeting, and the edited drawing.
Yeah, you said so. This is Exhibit 123. So is this what you're referring to as the edited drawing?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay.
That was on the table because Mr. Hopkins had retrieved that from the teacher when he went to get Ethan from class.
Okay.
So that was on the table, and for them to view. Although, like I mentioned before, Sean had emailed a copy of the original document to Mrs. Crumbley, and so they were kind of discussing what was next. And she had a pamphlet or a packet of resources that the district provides.
So who gave her that?
Sean, Mr. Hopkins would.
Okay. And when we say resources, what do you mean by that?
Different counseling resources available in the area, and it's like a standard packet that the school district would have on hand to provide to anybody that needed it.
Okay. Have you been involved in meetings where that sort of information has been provided to parents in the past?
Yes.
And you said it's a standard list of information? Or
It's just a
resources?
general list, yeah,
Okay.
of stuff in the surrounding local area.
Does that include facilities or organizations that allow same-day counseling appointments?
That I'm not sure of.
All right. Now, clearly your expectation of what was to happen at the meeting was not met. Tell us about that, please.
So, throughout the conversation, I had overheard his parents confirm the things that Ethan was sharing with us in his office that were kind of explaining the drawings and the words that he had written that supported him feeling sad. And so he had shared that a dog had passed away recently, a grandmother had passed away, and then one of his close friends had moved within the last month or so. And then that he was very interested in designing video games, and that had led to a argument the night before that he should be more focused on his academics rather than the video games.
Did she provide any details about that argument?
No.
Okay. Did she provide any details about how the circumstance in which when his friend moved away?
No.
I'm sorry, please continue.
And that he really struggled through the pandemic with the virtual learning, as many students did, and that they felt like he should put more focus on his academics than spending time working through the video game design.
So at any point, did you see this as anything different than your initial perception, which was a mental health issue?
No.
Okay. You said you had the backpack with you and you provided it to the student. Okay. At any point, did anybody request to search the backpack?
They did not.
Okay, he has the backpack in his hand, but he can't search it, or he didn't search it. He didn't think to search it. According to a legal analysis that I heard on one of the media stations, the school has the right to do that. A police officer can't do it, but the school has the right to do that. But again, it leans back to Jennifer and James knew he had a gun, knew he owned a gun. And the question mark is, should they have checked his backpack to see, instead of going home and then realizing it's gone after everything happened? It kind of makes me think they weren't really in the mindset that he was capable of this. And I think that is telling to the jury, because if Jennifer thought that he was capable of it, Don't you guys think she would have checked that backpack? She wouldn't have wanted this to happen. No matter what anybody thinks about the situation, there's nothing out there that says, "Oh, she wanted this attack to happen." She didn't. She didn't want this attack to happen. So, her not checking the backpack to me just tells me that it wasn't even in her frame of thought that this was a possibility. And I just feel like I'm watching what the jury's watching. So, does the jury have the same thought process as I do on this?
Did you search the backpack yourself?
I did not. It wasn't necessary or rise to the occasion that I do that because I didn't have any reasonable suspicion to do that. And
Explain what that means, please.
Sure. So reasonable suspicion means that there needs to, by law says you have to have some type of reasonable suspicious activity that would lead to searching student belongings. And so typically that's like a report that someone has a Veda pen or a weapon or that they're securing something they're not supposed to have at school, or nervous behavior when you have their belongings, which is very typical of students that we have searched in the past.
Oh, no, there was no thought of that, but hello, he's drawing a weapon on his school stuff.
They usually, their behavior will change when you're in possession of their stuff, and none of that was present at that moment.
Okay. And again, it's a lot of details. Well, have you ever met the defendant before, Jennifer Crumbley?
I have not known.
You ever met her husband before?
I have not known.
Prior to this day, you ever met her son before?
I did not know.
Okay. And was he wearing a face mask the entire time?
He was wearing a COVID mask.
Now, was there a desire for him not to be left alone at this point?
That's what Sean had stated during the meeting when we were discussing what to do moving forward. And so his recommendation was that Ethan receive outside counseling as soon as possible today, if possible, meaning the 30th.
Mm-hmm.
Pointing to the school counselor again.
And the response to that was, we can't take him anywhere today. We have to go back to work.
And who said that?
Mrs. Crumbley said that.
The defendant did?
Yes.
Okay. What was your reaction to that?
It seemed a little odd based on my experiences in previous similar parent meetings when students are being seen for mental health. Because typically...
Your Honor, objection as to relevance, what he's experienced with other parents.
So it's similar to Mr. Hopkins' testimony yesterday. We can lay a foundation that he's been in these meetings before. And,
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, sir, you've had the opportunity to be in these type of parent meetings before with mental health issues?
Yes.
Okay. And could you put a number for the jury and how many you've been a part of?
Between 5 and 10 of them.
Okay.
Across the time of my education.
Okay. So calling in a parent for an immediate meeting, that's not a regular thing that occurs, correct?
It is not.
Okay. So that's something that something has to cause the school administration to do that.
Correct, yes.
Okay. Now, you testified earlier that it was your expectation that the defendant or her husband would take the defendant's son home, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. And this did not meet your expectation, but you found it to be odd. So, comparing what happened November the 30th with everything in your prior experience, tell us why you felt that to be odd.
Typically, when it's recommended that parents take their children to seek out mental assistance immediately, they follow the direction of the mental health professional, and that's been my experience every time.
In this case, that would have been Sean Hopkins.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Now, what was your impression of how that meeting ended on the 30th?
It sort of seemed like it ended abruptly. It was a very short meeting. I want to say it was somewhere near 10 minutes long.
Okay.
And once it was determined that they were not going to take him home, it was stated that he would end up having to walk home if he was going home and then be home by himself. And
who said
that? Ethan had said that.
Okay, that was damning. Once again, Ethan was saying, why would he say it like that? If I go home, I'm going to be home by myself. That's just weird to me.
Okay. In front of his parents?
Yes.
Did either Jennifer or James dispute that?
No, they didn't.
Okay. Please continue.
And that's when Sean had responded that he really didn't want Ethan to be home by himself alone, and that he thought it was best that if he wasn't going to leave that morning with his parents, that he remain in school so that he could be surrounded by other people. and that he would monitor his attendance and check in with him.
Oh, I don't know if I caught this in the school counselor's testimony, but he's saying that they did say that he should have gotten counseling that same day. Okay, so now defense is coming up to cross. He has a master's degree in education and human development. She's going after his education, and he has a bachelor's degree in sociology. He's had on-the-job training only, is what he said. So apparently this is his second job as a dean of students. Okay, so she's going back to getting on the bandwagon of, what were you taught in your previous jobs and, how to handle the situation and whatnot. Again, I feel like she's touching on a lot of what the prosecution's already touched on.
In the trainings you did, were you taught signs of things to look for in students that would have discipline issues?
Yes, I was.
I believe you mentioned that one of those signs that you would know to look for in terms of thinking about what, if you need to search their backpack, would be whether they seem nervous when you're holding their materials, correct?
Yes.
Okay, she is kind of doing the same thing I'm doing. She's going in on, well, why didn't you search the backpack? We'll listen to that part.
Now, in this case, there was a time where you walked down to the classroom and retrieved Mrs. Crumbley's son's backpack.
Yes.
And you carried that backpack to the office where you were meeting with Mr. Hopkins and Mr. Crumbley's son, Mrs. Crumbley's son.
Yes.
When you carried that backpack back to Mrs. Crumbley's son, he did not appear to be nervous at all that you were holding his backpack.
He didn't appear to even care that I was holding his backpack.
And so based on him not caring or showing signs of nervousness, you had no concern there was anything in that bag.
I had no reasonable suspicion to search his belongings, no.
You did make the observation that that bag felt unusually heavy.
That is not correct.
Did you ever make the observation about how heavy the bag seemed?
I made a joke to Miss Morgan at how easily she picked it up and then handed it to me and my arm dropped. And so it was more of a joke of how strong she was compared to handing it off to me.
I see. But you do those trainings?
Yes.
Have you done more than one training?
Yes.
More than 5?
No.
So your main job or responsibility at Oxford High School was to be in charge of discipline issues with the students.
That was one of them, yes.
And when you were looking at any situation involving Mrs. Crumbley's son, there was nothing that you determined required a disciplinary action.
There was nothing that had required discipline in that situation, no.
So her strategy on this is these teachers that have all of this experience dealing with troubled children, they also did not think that anything was wrong with Ethan other than the fact that he was depressed.
Would you agree those are mixed signal kind of statements?
No, I would say it looks like you have a teenager who is trying to not get in trouble, knowing that the dean of students is involved. Most of the time when I'm involved in student meetings, the kids always think they're in trouble, which is not necessarily always the case. So I looked at that as he was trying to get himself out of being in trouble. Thinking he was going to be in trouble from this meeting we were holding.
And that was something that's not unusual for you to see?
That's not unusual, no.
That doesn't mean there's a threat to you?
That doesn't mean there's a threat, no.
In terms of Oxford and the area community, you're familiar with the fact that students at the school, there are many who are interested in hunting, guns, target practice, that kind of thing, correct?
Yes, during hunting season, it's kind of like a reminder that sort of gets put out for students that go hunting in the mornings before the late start Wednesdays to remember to not come to school in their gear and or have weapons in their vehicles from that morning. And like we've also had students that pose with guns for their homecoming pictures as well. So it's very common in the Oxford community.
Okay, so it's so common that there are students, they pose for homecoming
There have
pictures?
been students that'll pose with guns for in their homecoming photos.
I think even Shannon is shocked by what he says about the kids having the guns. Now, as far as posing for pictures at prom, I've never heard of that, but this generation is different from the one that I grew up in. But I think the most different thing that I've ever seen would be somebody wearing like a camouflage suit or something. But other than that, no, to have the weapon with them, no, it wasn't like that. But I didn't grow up in the Instagram age, so
When you're talking about homecoming photos, you're talking about like the dance.
They're dressed up at home and taking photos, correct?
So they're dressed up in their, little party dresses, and they're holding guns in the photographs before they go to the dance?
Yes.
And you're saying that there are students who go hunting in the mornings before even coming to school?
Yes. So at the time, we had late start Wednesdays, so school didn't start till 10:20ish. So when hunting season would start, they potentially could be out hunting with their parents in the morning.
So in addition to what you did know in this case, seeing a gun or talks of a gun, that was not something that caused alarm to make you think there was some kind of threat.
No, nor
Guns-
was I aware that he even had a gun.
Guns at that school are very common. It sounds like it's a common topic if they're in pictures of homecoming dresses and things like that.
I would say across many schools, it wouldn't be uncommon to see guns drawn on assignments or papers. Oftentimes, there are certain books or part of the curriculum, and students end up drawing guns to represent stuff in the stories.
Now, my understanding is that you guys recommended immediate care. I'm sorry, I'm going to strike that. I was going into a question I've already asked you. You did not think it was strange that the parents were not taking.
okay, so at the end of the testimony, she goes over that that you've sworn to be under oath. And he's like, yeah, I know. So anyway, that was it for this gentleman's testimony. Next up, we have Jennifer's boss, and his name is Andrew Smith. That was a really short one, and I'll have that out in a little bit. Thank you for watching, everyone. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button so you're notified the next time I upload a video.